What shocking secrets did scientists uncover from King Richard III's remains hidden for centuries beneath Leicester, and why did their findings force historians to rewrite royal history? From grisly skeletons to DNA that shattered centuries of assumptions, every discovery challenged what we thought we knew about England's last Plantagenet king. Stay with us, because what they revealed about Richard III in 2025 will leave you speechless. A king erased on purpose. Richard III did not simply die on a battlefield. He was dismantled. His defeat at Bosworth Field was followed by something far more calculated than victory. Within hours of his death, his body was stripped naked and slung across a horse, like proof of a trophy kill. This was not necessity. It was symbolism. The message was unmistakable. The last Plantagenet king was no longer a ruler, no longer human, and certainly no longer worthy of dignity. Public display mattered in late medieval England. A dead king could still inspire rebellion if treated with reverence. So Henry Tudor made a careful choice. Richard's corpse was exhibited in Leicester for days, exposed to the eyes of commoners who needed to believe the crown had truly fallen. Chroniclers later described the body as visibly mutilated, with wounds inflicted after death. These were not acts of rage. They were political punctuation marks. The burial that followed was equally deliberate. Richard was interred hastily in the Church of the Grey Friars, a Franciscan friary with no royal significance. There was no tomb, no marker, no ceremony befitting a crowned monarch. He was placed in a shallow grave, misaligned, his hands possibly bound. This was not oversight. This was a burial designed to fade. A king placed where memory itself could be smothered. What happened next sealed the erasure. When Henry VII dissolved the monasteries decades later, Grey Friars was among the first to vanish. The church was demolished. The graveyard was disturbed. Stones were reused. Records quietly disappeared. Over time, the exact location of Richard's body was lost, and then doubted, and then mocked. A rumor emerged that his bones were thrown into a river. The story spread because it served a purpose. A king without remains is a king without legacy. This physical disappearance allowed something else to grow unchecked: narrative power. Tudor historians wasted no time reshaping Richard into a moral warning rather than a man. He became the misshapen villain, the child murderer, the tyrant whose fall was not just necessary, but righteous. Each generation added detail. None questioned the absence of a body. Absence made exaggeration safe. The destruction of Richard's memory extended beyond words. His laws were repealed. His loyalists were executed or silenced. Even the calendar moved on without ritual acknowledgement of his reign. England did not mourn him because it was taught not to. Silence became policy. Yet erasure requires maintenance. Over centuries, cracks appeared. Local traditions in Leicester whispered that the king was still there somewhere. Antiquarians argued over maps. A few scholars noticed inconsistencies in Tudor accounts. But without evidence, doubt stayed quiet. History favors those who control the ground beneath it. By the 20th century, Richard III had become a caricature frozen in Shakespeare's shadow. The idea that he could be physically recovered seemed absurd. Parking lots do not give up kings, but the very reason his body was lost was the same reason it could be found. It was never honored, never protected, never meant to be recovered at all. The erasure had worked for over 500 years. Almost. If a king was erased so thoroughly, what would happen if his body suddenly returned to speak for itself? Stay with us as the mystery deepens. The skeleton, that undermined 5 centuries of lies. When Richard III's bones were uncovered beneath a Leicester car park, the world paused. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary archaeological find, human remains in a shallow grave. But nothing about this discovery was ordinary. Every fracture, every curve of the spine, every angled bone told a story of deliberate violence, a story that clashed with centuries of accepted history. This was a king, speaking from the silence of Earth. The condition of the skeleton shocked even seasoned archaeologists. The spine was curved at an extreme angle, a deformity consistent with historical accounts of scoliosis, yet more pronounced than any surviving portrait suggested. It was a reminder that Richard's physical reality had been exaggerated, twisted by propagandists over centuries. Yet the deformity alone did not account for the trauma visible in his skull and limbs. Several injuries had been inflicted post-mortem, evidence of humiliation, meant to send a message beyond death. This was no accident. It was calculated degradation. Other details deepened the sense of premeditated erasure. The grave itself was irregular and narrow, too small to contain a body of a full-grown man without bending. The skeleton was cramped, its head tilted unnaturally. No care was given to positioning. Skeleton and soil told the same story. A ruler buried as if he had never existed. The rushed nature of the burial reinforced what the Tudors wanted the public to believe: a man defeated not just militarily, but morally, socially, and historically. Forensic analysis of the wounds brought further revelations. The skull bore at least 11 distinct injuries, including sharp, precise cuts consistent with battle weapons, but several had no battlefield explanation. Cuts across the back of the head and shoulders suggested execution-style strikes after death. Each scar read like a punctuation mark on a narrative written to shame. The body became a witness, contradicting every story designed to portray him as monstrous. Even more astonishing were subtle clues embedded in the burial context. Tiny fragments of soil indicated that he had been covered hastily, without ritual. Items that might have been placed with a king, symbols of office, trinkets, personal belongings, were missing. Archaeologists realized this was not a king's grave. It was a cautionary plot, a deliberate act of historical editing. The body under the car park was evidence not just of death, but of systematic storytelling. Yet for all the trauma, the skeleton also revealed humanity. Marks of healing on bones indicated previous injuries survived in life, suggesting resilience and endurance. There were signs that the king had been active, engaged, and capable up until his final day. This starkly contrasted with Tudor portrayals, which described Richard as cruel and broken. For the first time, physical evidence contradicted written history, proving that propaganda had long overpowered fact. With the skeleton exposed to the modern eye, historians began to reassess centuries of narratives. The find demanded they confront uncomfortable truths about bias, manipulation, and power. It was more than a dig. It was a confrontation with history itself, showing how a kingdom's story could be rewritten through erasure and myth-making. Could a single skeleton undo the entire architecture of Tudor lies and expose truths long buried under centuries of deception? Come with us to explore the hidden corners of the story. The genetic proof that closed one door and opened another. The skeleton had revealed the king's body, but DNA would reveal the king himself. When mitochondrial DNA tests began, scientists were chasing a mystery buried for centuries. Mitochondrial DNA passes unchanged from mother to child, a perfect tool for confirming identity across generations. By tracing the genetic line of Richard III's known maternal relatives, they could match his remains to living descendants. The results were decisive. The skeleton beneath Leicester was undeniably Richard III, yet the celebration of discovery concealed an even stranger truth. While mitochondrial DNA confirmed identity, another test, the Y chromosome analysis, hinted at a puzzle no one expected. The male lineage did not match historical records. For centuries, it was assumed that the direct male line of the Yorkist kings had survived intact, but the genetic evidence suggested otherwise. Somewhere along the line, the inheritance of the crown had veered off its official path. History had recorded the succession, but biology told a conflicting story. The implications were profound. Scientists could confirm Richard's remains, but they could not explain how the male line had diverged. This was not a flaw in the testing, it was a crack in the narrative of legitimacy itself. Richard's skeleton had endured centuries of humiliation, but now his DNA was challenging the very foundation of what it meant to be a king. Each living male descendant of the Yorkist line carried a silent contradiction, a truth that had been hidden in plain sight. The discovery also reframed the public fascination with Richard. No longer was he only the hunchbacked king, villainized by Tudor propaganda. Now he became a figure of intrigue for science as well as history. Scholars, journalists, and laypeople alike were forced to confront the unsettling possibility that the succession of English royalty was not as secure or straightforward as they had been taught. The narrative of conquest, inheritance, and legitimacy suddenly felt fragile, almost human. Even the scientific community was cautious. The Y chromosome anomaly was discussed in hushed tones in academic papers. Researchers carefully avoided speculation that might destabilize historical understanding. Footnotes hinted at irregularities, but public reports emphasized certainty only about identity, not lineage. The skeleton spoke with absolute clarity. The genes whispered riddles that historians had never anticipated. The questions multiplied. Had there been illegitimacy hidden in plain sight? Did political ambitions obscure biological reality? Could centuries of dynastic wars, plots, and murders have been fought over claims that were, in some sense, invalid? Richard III's remains had already challenged history's narrative. Now they challenged the very concept of royal blood, inheritance, and legitimacy. As this revelation sank in, one truth became unavoidable. Knowing the king's body was one thing, but understanding the full story of his bloodline was something else entirely. The discovery opened a door to a past that had been carefully closed by power, ambition, and propaganda. The king's skeleton was only the beginning. The genes were the deeper story, one that promised more unsettling surprises. If the king's own blood could betray centuries of assumed truth, what secrets still lay hidden in the royal lineage, waiting to be uncovered? Let us guide you into what no one expected. The test they didn't know how to explain. The Y chromosome results arrived like a whisper from the past that no historian had expected. Unlike mitochondrial DNA, which had confirmed Richard's identity beyond doubt, the male line evidence contradicted centuries of recorded genealogy. The line from Richard III's father, Edward IV, through successive male heirs, simply did not match the skeleton's Y chromosome. It was as if history itself had been biologically rewritten. Scholars stared at the data, unsure whether to question the science or the chronicles they had trusted for generations. The anomaly forced a re-examination of medieval records. Every marriage, every child, every claim in the royal archives came under scrutiny. historians realized that while official records celebrated a seamless Yorkist succession, biology hinted at hidden irregularities. Somewhere along the line, a male heir had not been who history claimed him to be. It was a subtle difference, invisible in the chronicles, but undeniable in the genome. The past suddenly felt fragile, like a manuscript with pages missing. This discovery challenged assumptions about medieval politics and personal relationships alike. Could an illegitimate birth have been deliberately concealed to preserve the stability of the crown? Did chroniclers unknowingly perpetuate the fiction, or was it actively enforced as propaganda? Every recorded alliance, battle, and negotiation now seemed layered with secrets. The revelation was not about Richard alone. It was about an entire system built on appearances and careful omission. What made the finding even more astonishing was how it had been framed publicly. When the results were announced, they were cautiously described as unexpected rather than inconsistent. Press releases emphasized the confirmation of Richard's identity, while the Y chromosome puzzle was softened with hedging language. Academic papers hinted at a break in the male line, but avoided outright conclusions. It was a silent admission that even in the 21st century, some truths about kings could destabilize understanding of the past. For geneticists, the discovery also posed a moral question. How should evidence that undermines a royal lineage be handled? Publishing full details could provoke debate over centuries of legitimacy, perhaps even rewriting the narrative of dynasties. Yet hiding the truth would betray scientific rigor. The balance between historical respect and factual integrity became a dilemma the researchers had never anticipated. In this way, the skeleton's final secret had transcended archaeology. It was now a test of ethical storytelling itself. Despite the uncertainty, clues in the genetic data pointed toward a single, plausible explanation. Somewhere between the 15th and 16th centuries, an unrecorded event, illegitimacy, substitution, or concealment had inserted a break in the male line. For historians, this confirmed whispers of medieval rumors long dismissed as propaganda. The biological record was aligning perfectly with stories that the Tudors had tried to suppress, leaving science as the ultimate arbiter of truth. The revelation left more questions than answers. If the male line was interrupted, who bore the truth in their blood? What hidden maneuvers and secretive marriages had gone unrecorded to protect a crown? And perhaps most chillingly, how many other accepted truths about kings, succession, and power were built on unverified assumptions rather than reality? What if one test could topple the legacy of a royal dynasty? What other shadows remain hidden in history's silent halls? The next secret is waiting to be revealed. 2025 and the end of the anywhere theory. By 2025, genetic technology had advanced beyond what even the original Richard III project could have imagined. Where previous studies had relied on partial sequences and probabilistic matches, a new era of high-resolution sequencing allowed scientists to examine the genome with unprecedented precision. This breakthrough offered the promise of resolving a question that had lingered for half a millennium: exactly where the male line of the Yorkist kings had diverged from recorded history. What had once been speculation could now be tested with mathematical certainty. The breakthrough began in a modest laboratory in London, where a team of geneticists meticulously compared the DNA of living male descendants, tracing back to Richard III's relatives. Unlike mitochondrial DNA, which follows maternal lines, this Y chromosome analysis could track the male line across generations. For centuries, historians had operated under what was casually called the anywhere theory, assuming that a lost branch could be anywhere along the tree, that a break might be too far back to trace. Now, for the first time, this uncertainty could be resolved. The results were startling. Scientists identified a single generation where the Y chromosome line failed to match the documented succession. The divergence was precise, measurable, and verifiable. A medieval rumor, long dismissed as propaganda, suddenly aligned with this genetic anomaly. Chronicles whispered of questions surrounding the parentage of a Yorkist prince, and the genome confirmed that at least one male heir in that branch had not inherited the Y chromosome expected of a legitimate line. The rumor had been right all along. The discovery sent shockwaves through the academic community. Historians were forced to reconsider what had been taught in classrooms for decades. Royal succession, previously treated as a series of uncontested events, was now a story with hidden gaps, deliberate deceptions, and unrecorded secrets. The wars, the alliances, the political machinations that had defined the Wars of the Roses took on a new dimension. What if some of it had been fought over claims that were never biologically legitimate? The implications reached far beyond Richard III, touching the very concept of monarchy and inheritance. The 2025 sequencing also clarified another point that had been frustrating researchers for years. The so-called anywhere gap was not scattered or ambiguous. It was a single, identifiable moment in history. This pinpointed generation coincided with the reign of Edward IV, Richard III's older brother, whose marriage and offspring had long been the subject of whispered doubt. Historical documents hinted at secrecy and urgency surrounding royal heirs, and now DNA suggested that there may have been good reason for such caution. The crown was more vulnerable than contemporaries had admitted, and more manipulable than scholars had understood. Further analysis revealed patterns that had been invisible before. Certain genetic markers indicated that the break in the male line was not a random mutation or laboratory error. It was consistent with a deliberate substitution, possibly a hidden birth or an unacknowledged child. Medieval politics demanded plausible heirs to maintain stability, and the Y chromosome evidence confirmed that this was not just rumor, it was a biological fact. History had been actively curated, and science had finally caught up. The revelations prompted a re-examination of artifacts, portraits, and chronicles. Items that had been dismissed as minor or decorative suddenly took on significance. A portrait of Edward IV's sons, previously overlooked for its symbolic gestures, was scrutinized for clues about parentage. Records of birth announcements, legal contracts, and court correspondence were revisited. Every detail was now weighed against a new standard: genetic reality. The past, once fixed by ink and legend, was being rewritten by DNA. Even beyond academic circles, the discovery captured public imagination. The idea that a single technological advance could expose a truth hidden for centuries resonated with people worldwide. Documentaries, articles, and social media debates followed immediately. The narrative of monarchy as inviolable, precise, and orderly gave way to a story of human fallibility, secrecy, and the fragility of recorded history. Richard III, once a villain in Shakespearean fiction, was now a protagonist in a story of concealed truths and scientific revelation. Yet the breakthrough also raised philosophical questions. If one medieval rumor had been validated, what else had been buried under centuries of assumption and propaganda? Could the legitimacy of other dynasties be subject to the same scrutiny? And perhaps most disturbingly, What did this mean for the moral authority historically granted to kings? Bloodlines, once considered sacred, now appeared contingent and fragile, shaped by both chance and concealment. By the end of 2025, the anywhere theory was officially dead. Historians and geneticists alike agreed that science had pinpointed a singular moment in which royal legitimacy had fractured. It was not a theory anymore. It was empirical fact. The precision of modern genetics had ended centuries of speculation, revealing a medieval world far more human, more political, and far more secretive than previously imagined. Richard III's story was no longer just about a fallen king. It was about a dynasty whose foundations were quietly, invisibly challenged. This part of discovery closed one door on uncertainty, but opened countless others. Every confirmed break, every validated rumor, invited new questions about the consequences of illegitimacy, the hidden maneuvers of medieval courts, and the unrecorded decisions that shaped England's future. The past, once seen as a solid narrative, was revealed as a tapestry of secrets, lies, and biological truths finally brought into the light. When science uncovers the hidden crack in a royal lineage, what other long-buried truths could still emerge to rewrite history itself? Stay with us as the secrets grow even darker. When the crown had no blood behind it. The revelation from 2025 forced historians to confront an uncomfortable truth. The crown Richard III fought for may have been built on a lie. If the male line of the Yorkist dynasty had fractured centuries earlier, every battle, every assassination, and every political maneuver took on a new, startling dimension. Wars that had shaped the course of England were no longer merely struggles for power. They were fights over a claim that might never have existed in the first place. The implications were as unsettling as they were profound. Richard himself had died believing he was defending a legitimate claim, yet science now suggested that the legitimacy of his lineage was compromised. The stakes of Bosworth Field, long romanticized as the clash of rival dynasties, were redefined. The kingmaker battles, the shifting alliances, and the relentless pursuit of heirs now appeared as desperate attempts to uphold a fiction. Each crown passed, each execution carried out, had been in service of a narrative carefully curated to hide a fracture invisible to the naked eye, but preserved in DNA. This perspective reshaped our understanding of the Wars of the Roses. The deaths of princes in the Tower, long shrouded in mystery and speculation, were no longer just political maneuvers. They were acts entangled with questions of legitimacy. If the Yorkist line had been biologically interrupted, the stakes for Tudor propaganda become clearer. Each story painted Richard and his family in extreme colors, while simultaneously protecting the claim of a new dynasty. Bloodlines were manipulated in life and in memory, leaving generations to inherit a story that was only partly true. Even artifacts and records once trusted as evidence were suddenly suspect. Legal documents affirming royal descent, ceremonial accounts, and heraldic records could no longer be taken at face value. Every symbol of legitimacy, the coronation, the oaths, the official recognition of heirs, was a layer of performance constructed over a hidden reality. The crown that sat on the heads of kings and queens was not merely ceremonial. It had been the outward projection of a lineage that science now suggested had cracks from the very beginning. Yet amidst this upheaval, Richard III's skeleton, once anonymous beneath a car park, stood as a silent testament to the truth. His body had endured centuries of indignity, and now his genetic legacy endured the scrutiny of modern science. The evidence of illegitimacy did not erase him, it reframed him. He was no longer just the villain of Tudor propaganda. He became the final witness to a dynasty's secret fractures, a king whose life and death exposed the fragility of human claims to power. The story also revealed the human cost of political ambition. Entire lives, from princes to soldiers, had been shaped by circumstances they could not control. Their fates were determined not by morality, skill, or chance, but by the invisible hand of legitimacy, an inheritance that, as it turned out, may not have been real. History, which had been written in ink and rhetoric, was now being corrected in molecules and cells. Ultimately, the crown Richard III sought was more than a symbol of authority. It was a symbol of legitimacy, of order, and of continuity. And yet, when examined under the lens of modern genetics, it revealed a startling truth. The very foundation of that authority was incomplete. Power had been inherited, claimed, and defended, but the blood that was supposed to justify it had, at a crucial moment, been absent. Were you stunned by the genetic revelations that exposed centuries of hidden lies about Richard III and the royal bloodline? Tell us which discovery shocked you the most and how it changed what you thought you knew about history.